On this week's video, we're doing something a little bit different. That's right, in an effort to constantly keep this channel kind of fresh and do some different things, and also to keep 2020's focus mainly on horror films, we're actually going to be counting down my 10 favorite Friday the 13th clones today. Some of these movies are going to be straight up ripoffs, and other ones are going to simply be inspired from and take some inspiration from. Some of them are going to be pretty bad, starting at number 10, going all the way down to some fantastic movies, all the way down to number 1. So let's just see how much they actually rip off from their source material and how much they just pay tribute to, and which ones can actually cut the mustard, or the counselors. Coming in at number 10 is sort of an honorable mention, but in 1981 there was an Indonesian ripoff of Friday the 13th called Serigala. I think that's how you pronounce that. If it's not, call me out. Which involves a Jason-like killer bumping off some treasure hunters. I couldn't really find an English version or even one with subtitles, but it's kind of like someone saw Friday the 13th and said, let's do this, but add some speedboat chases, and I don't know, some zombies. It's mainly just very similar to Friday the 13th, with an unseen killer stalking off people at random and killing them, and then sure enough the killer is revealed to be an older woman, just like an Indonesian Pamela Voorhees. But go figure, there's kung fu involved here. If you're still not convinced that this is a ripoff, well, this is the final scene. I mean, she even wakes up in a hospital afterwards. And I may not have understood it enough to rank it higher, but it definitely belongs on this list. And it was kind of fun to watch, I mean, even though I had no clue what I was watching. So let's move on to number 9. The year 2000 brought us Bloody Murder. And is this a Friday the 13th ripoff? Let's take a look at the cover art. 1 minute in, and we meet our killer in a hockey mask and jumpsuit with a chainsaw. It's like Jason, Michael Myers, and Leatherface were the Transformers, and this guy is the GoBots version. He's got this new type of chainsaw that makes noise, but the chain doesn't move. And then 2 minutes later, doubles in size. We get a collection of counselors up at a camp getting ready for the kids to arrive, and a crazy man telling them that they're all doomed, and the mask is brought along by one of the pranksters of the group. Does any of this sound familiar? Dean acts like a dick, but is he a murderer? They actually spend some time with investigating, and I think it wants to invoke a Scream whodunit, but fails pretty miserably. More people get killed, and they even do the fake arresting Billy bit from Scream. Although it does have this innovative scene where a guy is stabbed through the chest, and then from somewhere off camera, someone throws a kickball at him, I guess? You don't see anyone throw it or anything, and there doesn't seem to be any reason for it, because it obviously doesn't do anything. It's just this random ball bouncing by. Also, when our main girl thinks that she's figured out who the murderer is, she has a flashback to the killing of a character that she doesn't even know is dead yet. In fact, she finds his body like 1 minute later, and is surprised. The killer is finally revealed to be Patrick, who is disguised as Trevor Morehouse, but he's actually Nelson Hammond, who was screwed over 20 years ago, and I guess this is his revenge. He's arrested, but apparently Trevor is still out there. There's sequels to this, so I guess it'll be a movie timeline at some point. Moving on to number 8. Back in 2014, we saw the Australian Charlie's Farm. Stop me if you've heard this before, but 4 friends go on a camping trip, including the acting powerhouse that is Tara Reid. They're warned about going up to Charlie's Farm by a local guy telling them of doom, because that's required at this point. Then there's a legend of Charlie told while sitting around a campfire, and is this starting to sound familiar? Charlie's dad is Chop Top, and his parents are killed by a vengeful mob, but I guess he just sticks around and kills people. Then, I guess to prove it's either not a Jason clone or is a Jason clone, I don't know, they bring in Kane Hodder playing a regular guy for once. After it feels like 6 hours or so, grown-up Charlie finally shows up and starts to violence. And guess what? He's a massive deformed hillbilly, to the surprise of literally no one. His killings are particularly gruesome, like like Hatchet levels of over the top. And in the final 15 minutes, we get a Charlie versus Kane face-off, but there's one character whose name is in the title. Tara Reid is our last alive, and like the Friday remake, Charlie has an underground lair that he occasionally keeps victims in. And then she escapes but gets killed, and that's it. The movie just it's just over. It just ends. This one's really cliche, and it's kind of not that fun, and there's really nothing new to offer, and except for some great gore bits, it's really not worth watching. It's probably the least inspired by Friday the 13th on this list, although there's definitely inspiration drawn. Number 7 jumps a little more into comedy, because Decapitated came out back in 1989, released by Troma. And within 30 seconds, we see what kind of movie we're getting. Clearly going for comedy. We see a masked killer offing hikers in the woods. A couple books a camping trip through a travel agent, and he recommends a camp with murders in its pasts. And he rounds up his friends with lots of extreme close camera angles. It's fairly amusing, and no one takes it too seriously, although it suffers from some of the actors trying a little too hard to be funny. I have to admit, though, I did love the ridiculous sound effects. Did I mention that the killer skips? More extreme close-ups, and then they tell the legend of Miles to camp, our Jason fill-in, but in a bit that I would have loved if it were a little bit more subtle. We don't get to hear the story. For some reason, there's also a psychotic transvestite, and people start getting killed off, but sort of not, because everyone keeps showing back up alive. And then there's this really weird ADR.
Alright, who's in the best shape here?
Did they record that over the phone? The killer is revealed to be the travel agent from the beginning, and yet all of them combined can't seem to take him out. Even though he's not supernatural at all. Everyone dies in a span of like 5 minutes, and Vince is the only survivor, rescued by the transvestite. I remember liking this when I saw it way back in the day, but not so much now. I mean, I guess it's fun for what it is. It's number 7. Coming in at number 6 is one of the more recent entries on this list. It's 2018's You Might Be the Killer, featuring Joss Whedon alums Willow and Topher. Sam here is apparently the last survivor of a camp slasher, and in a flashback we meet the assortment of counselors on the first day of camp, and we get a look at our killer. And well, I don't think that's a hockey mask, but it's close enough. The hook of this film is that when Sam sees the killer, things get a little weird, and the possibility is raised that even though he thinks that he's just a witness to the murders, he may actually be the killer. It's in the title. The flashback scenes tend to play around with the timing of things to make us second guess it, but he seems to think that the mask is actually possessing him. And we get an old-fashioned campfire legend scene, although the campfire is more of a fireplace here. The story plays out, and people start dying left and right, and things look bleaker and bleaker for Sam as it turns out that yes, he is the killer. Possessed by a haunted mask. Pretty soon it's just him and Jamie left, and unfortunately she puts the mask on and takes him out and becomes the new killer, and then we jump ahead 2 years and I guess Sam's undead now. It plays into the whole meta thing with the concept of the final girl, and I guess that the 2 years would be the amount of time needed for a sequel, so Sam would come back for another round. It's not a bad movie, it's actually pretty darn enjoyable. It's just that it actually a little too quickly drops the whole you might be the killer thing, and it's only like a half hour in before it's just like, okay, yeah, you are the killer. Moving on to number 5. Madman was one of the earliest Friday knockoffs since it debuted just 2 years later in 1982, although it didn't get a wide release until '83. It was one of several slasher flicks involving campers in the woods around that time, but I'm singling it out because I've either already talked about the others or am planning to for another series. This one starts with a campfire tale of Madman Mars, who killed his wife and kids and was then hung, but survived and could still be stalking the woods. And by could, I mean, yeah, he is. Soon enough, the killings begin, and Francine is here, and I think these are supposed to be either teenagers or college kids, but most of them appear to be in their 30s, and this hot tub scene is weird. And it just keeps going on and on. And it's really weird to see Galen Ross basically play a kid after seeing her a few years earlier as a grown woman in Dawn of the Dead. The funniest part here is that the entire middle of this film consists of someone going missing in the woods, someone going to look for that person, discovering their body, and then getting killed. And then this happens like 4 times. They just keep going out there. Our killer's revealed, and true to form, he's a large, deformed hillbilly. And he comes face to face with final girl Betsy, who he impales. But everything catches on fire, but Mars escapes. There's literally no climax here. The final fight lasts 3 seconds, and it totally just ends. I guess they wanted to set up another one, so I guess that this would be a candidate for failure to launch, I guess, but no sequel ever came. But it did have its own theme song, so I guess it had Zach going for it.
You call him the legend lives, beware the madman Mars.
Moving on to number 4, and the ones I think are the good stuff. 2015 saw a different kind of Jason clone with Lumberjack Man, part of the 8 Films to Die For series. So we've got a pretty standard setup. A bunch of kids are heading to summer camp, although with a slight twist that it's a church camp. Michael Madsen is here, but instead of chasing alien hybrids, he's now delivering really important dialogue like this.
You don't know what breakfast is?
Where's the goddamn cereal?
The camp is run by a bad wig, a porn star, and I guess South Park's chef. Our killer is a big guy, of course, wearing a mask with demonic red eyes, and he's equipped with an assortment of edged weapons. He's clearly supernatural, though, as he has the ability to cast illusions to lure in victims. There's this amazing exchange.
Skinny dipping. I don't think God would like that. Come on. To be unashamed is to be without sin. Oh, okay.
Our villain carries around a wagon with giant pancakes on it, and is, of course, bulletproof, but has an unusual weakness of, maple syrup. He gets an animated origin story which has to do with a stolen flapjack recipe, and the demon logger is a ghost, much like Victor Crowley. There's a scene where he kills the camp leader and I guess tears out her implants and throws them at somebody, but the problem is that earlier in the film that character had a nude scene, and she very clearly, very obviously did not have any augmentation going on. Pretty soon, all that's left is Faith, Reggie the chef, and Madsen's Shirtcliffe, and they find a huge vat of syrup, and Shirtcliffe says,
Strip down naked, get your clothes off, and douse yourself in the syrup.
I'm sure that'll be necessary, right? She does, and covers herself in syrup, and then maples him to death mostly by hugging him. Oh, so I guess it was necessary? This one's not that great, but I kind of love it. It's really cheesy and silly. It's definitely maybe a little bit more comedy than it is a horror film, but it's just, I just thought it was fun. It might not be your cup of tea, but I got a kick out of it. Coming in at number 3 is probably my most unexpected surprise. Twisted Nightmare is from 1987, one of the earlier entries on here, and involves a group of friends invited to a camp paradise for the weekend. And this guy's glasses and stash combo rule. Everyone looks very 80s, and Laura here has had a bad previous experience with the camp. Things kick off pretty quick as this massive killer shows up and starts the dirty work. Like Jason, he kills people at the camp at a party, and they disappear for stretches of time without their friends noticing. There's Kane, the groundskeeper, who they really want us to think is the killer, and we find out that several years ago, Laura's brother Matthew, who appears to be possibly mentally handicapped, just kind of caught on fire and disappeared. Our killer is large, can kill with his bare hands, and remains off-screen for a majority of the time. It was filmed on the same ranch as Friday the 13th Part 3, although our killer doesn't wear a mask, but he does have a big blue light that's always right behind him for some reason. And he shrugs off bullets like they were nothing. He's deformed, but I guess can conjure electricity somehow? He does it one time. It's not explained. It never does it again. It's never even mentioned. It just does it. Turns out the killer is Laura's brother, who looks sort of woofy. And hey, Friday fans, does this pitchfork thing look familiar? Turns out that Laura's in on it, and Kane blows up the barn, killing everyone, but like magic, it reforms. This one is pure Jason clone, but you know what this has that Friday the 13th never will? Dean.
Hi.
Where you headed, homeboy?
I'm going up to Big Sur.
You find a ride, asshole.
Y'all can run around the dirt all you want. We're going back to the civilized world.
Bullshit, I'll kick his fucking ass.
You having fun, Dean?
Yeah, sure. Fuck you guys.
You're all a bunch of assholes. We're leaving in the morning. You're an asshole too, Lauren. I never liked your fucking brother either.
Hey, don't ever call me a pussy.
What the hell's going on out here?
Nothing, asshole.
I gotta say real quick also too that before I had done the research for this video, I had never even heard of this movie. I've never even seen this movie really spoken of. But this movie is amazing. It's number 3 on my list for a reason. It's one of the best, worst movies that you will see. I hope I'm not overhyping this, but this movie was phenomenal. Speaking of phenomenal, here comes number 2. 1989's Unmasked Part 25, also known as The Hand of Death, and Jackson's Back, is one of the most obvious Jason-inspired films on this list. It's more or less a parody of the killer and starts with that crazy guy warning people, although we're not at a summer camp, we're just in like a regular residential area. Our killer shows up really quickly wearing a hockey mask, of course, and tearing people apart. He even steals the whole impaling a couple having sex with a spear bit. After killing almost everyone, about 20 minutes into the movie, we take a turn. Jackson encounters a blind girl who mistakes him for her blind date, and then...
I can speak.
You can speak?
I've never had anyone to talk to much.
He's then unmasked, part 25, and he's a little bit toxy. And he and Shelley make love. And then they start dating. There's a meta element as there's an in-universe series of film called The Hand of Death, which features a killer named Jackson, which is supposed to be based on the actual guy. Jackson tries to swear off killing, well, you can guess how that goes. And then, well, if you ever wondered what Jason's sex life would be like, here's the answer. Things go bad when...
Don't you know what day it is? It's Friday. Friday the 13th.
Or reasonable facsimile. He goes and kills off all of Shelley's jerky friends at a party.
It just all seems so pointless.
It gets more meta at the ending as Jackson realizes that he'd never be allowed to love and continue on, and that Shelley is doomed because that's what's expected of him. And when he discovers she's pregnant, he kills her, only to discover that The Hand of Death Part 26 is coming out soon. This is another one that I feel like a lot of people haven't heard of, but I think is a fantastic film. It's definitely not a straightforward horror movie, but it was definitely a pre-Scream sort of meta, sort of making fun of the movies themselves kind of a movie, and I think it deserves a wider audience, so check it out. So here we go, number 1, probably the film with the most direct inspiration from Friday the 13th is The Final Girls, a movie that not only parodies the Friday films, but slashers in general. But mostly Friday. I mean, listen to this in the opening 30 seconds. So there's this old 80s horror film called Camp Bloodbath, which is basically our knockoff, with a villain named Billy, who's a deformed hillbilly in a mask, of course. 3 years after her mother's death, Max here wrangles up Maybe, Richard, and Alexander Ludwig here, who was in this movie and the same year's Final Girl, a totally unrelated film. And then they go see a re-release of Camp Bloodbath in the theater. The movie shows us Billy's origin, and then there's a fire in the theater which causes our group to go into the screen and into the actual movie. And Max is reunited with her dead mom, who is an actress in the movie. They witness Billy killing, and there's some great meta stuff as the crew experience a flashback to Billy's origin and turn black and white, but both movies take a turn when the film's final girl dies. so the events can't take place the way that they should, and they have to face off against Billy themselves. People die, tropes are dissected, leading to a final battle that'll make you cry and cheer, and unless you're a little bit dead inside, extremely happy. I'm not going to spoil the ending to this one because I really want you to see it if you haven't. If you have seen it, you know how great of an ending it is, and if you haven't seen it, then what are you waiting for? Check it out right now. And there you have it. It's 10 movies that are all somewhat inspired by Friday the 13th. Some a little bit more than others, some a little bit more blatant, some used for humorous effect, and other ones just kind of unintentionally humorous. But there's a lot to love on this list. If you're a Friday fan, you should definitely check these out. This is by no means the full extent of movies that are inspired by or knock off the Friday films. There's plenty more. There's a couple other ones that are very obvious that I just couldn't find. There was one called The Memorial Day Killer, which had a killer in a hockey mask. It seemed very obviously to be based on Friday the 13th, kind of similar-ish. And quite a few other ones that I just couldn't track down, but these were the ones I found. So if you know some other ones, let me know down below. Let me know what you thought of these ones. Let me know which one of these are your favorite. Let me know if you've seen Twisted Nightmare, because I've spoken about 6 or 7 other horror fans, and no one has heard of this movie, but you gotta see it. Well, that's about it for this week's video. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know down below. Like, subscribe, do all that stuff. Check out the patrons over here, and I'll see you in a little while for another great video. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.